Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? My name is Maribel Landrao, and I am the Assistant Director of the University Core Curriculum. Dr. Enran and I are very excited. She will be in a little bit later. She's in another event. The award-winning Brownson Debate Team, which is very dear to my heart, it's presenting tonight, along representing the College of Communication and the Arts, under the direction of Professor Kathy Sisek and Professor Hopkins. We asked them to present on Dante. That came up to my mind. I've seen them many times perform. I may not know the new students, but like I said, the debate team is very dear to my heart. We call it the Dante Re Interpreted. It is a performance of selection of excerpts of Dante that we're teaching in Core 1, Journey of Transformation, chosen by us. And this year marks the 700th anniversary of the death of the poet, of Dante. So the Core, along with Catholic Studies, Communication and the Arts, the Center for Catholic Studies, the Seminary, Immaculate Conception, School of Theology, and obviously the library, which we have a beautiful exhibit in the window. Please stop by. It's honored. We're really excited. We're really honored to bring this performance in front of all of you. So with no more talking from myself, for my part, I open up the floor to the team.
Thank you, Maribel.
You're welcome.
Good evening, everyone. I am Professor Sam Ornberger Hopkins, and I am a lecturer here at Seton Hall University, lecturer of communication. I'm also the head coach of our speech and debate team, as Professor Landrao mentioned. Now, when you hear speech and debate, you probably have this image of people standing behind podiums in suits, debating esoteric interpretations of ethical issues. And you're not wrong. That is a portion of what we do, but it's a very small portion of what we do in the grand scheme of things. In addition to debate, we also participate in speech events, like persuasive speaking or informative speaking. We also participate in interpretation events like prose interpretation, dramatic interpretation, and poetry interpretation, which is, of course, what the theme of tonight's performance is. So a little bit on the art of oral interpretation. Oral interpretation has a very strict focus on literature and literature's communicative aspects. Now, when you think of literature, you probably imagine words on a page, on a book, on a shelf somewhere. You might take off the shelf and sit somewhere in solitude and read silently to yourself. This version of literature, this vision of literature, is actually relatively new in recorded human history. And the reasons are very simple. So if we go back, if we were walking the streets of Italy alongside Dante when he was writing a work like the Divine Comedy, we would have predated the printing press by more than 100 years. Additionally, education would be very limited to those of an elite class and elite status, meaning most of us would not be able to read. And since there's no printing press, even if we could, we'd have trouble finding a book. What this means is that for most of human history, literature was conceptualized as something that you would listen to, that you would hear with an audience and experience with someone who is interpreting it for you. Now, while this seems like a novel idea, it has lived on through the centuries. Modern scholars such as Ta-Nehisi Coates, or earlier in the century, W.E.B. Du Bois, authors like Mark Twain, went on tours where they would share their work verbally for audiences, gaining an understanding of how the audience would respond to it and tweaking it before publication. This, of course, is the precursor to the modern book tour. So even today, the oral interpretation of literature is a mainstay in terms of how we interpret literature and consume literature as a culture and as audiences. Now, a word on what you'll be seeing tonight. It will look a lot like acting, right? We're going to have students come up and give speeches. They're going to be interpreting literature. They're going to be using things like facial expressions, posture, gesture, as well as vocal inflection, rate, pace, tone, things like that. Now, where it differs from acting is when an actor is cast in a show, let's say Hamlet, The actor seeks to embody Hamlet, to become Hamlet. And sure, the actor is acknowledging that the words come from William Shakespeare, but they actually sever that tie between the author, the work, and the audience. Because when you're playing Hamlet, one of the worst things you can do would be to break the fourth wall and speak directly to the audience. So, if acting severs the connection from author to text, from actor to audience, oral interpretation seeks to reconnect each of these together. So, the students you're seeing here tonight have taken a look at Dante's work, his life and his times, have sought to understand what he was trying to accomplish with his work, will seek to embody that work for you, hopefully connecting Dante to his work, to the interpreter, to the audience, so that you ultimately have a relationship with the work itself. A circular relationship, connecting all parts of the interpretation. So that is what we are pursuing tonight. Not the current concept of literature that we might have, that it's something that exists by yourself, silently and in solitude, but rather something that takes place in a public forum, with an interpreter and an audience. This is how many people would have heard the words of Dante for the very first time in the 1300s. So, with that in mind, we hope that you enjoy tonight's show. I will now welcome to the stage a sophomore member of the team, Dan O'Connor.
Thank you, Sam. I'm just going to introduce all of the pieces that we're going to perform tonight. So, thank you. Dante was born in Florence in 1265. Upon his father's death, 20 years later, he began to engage with the politics of his city more than he had previously. So by 1300, he had accumulated a great deal of political influence in Florence and was even elected as one of the 7 priors of the city. However, his tenure as prior was cut short. In 1302, Dante was exiled from his home while on a diplomatic mission to Rome to speak to the Pope. While he was there, his political rivals took control of Florence and exiled him on unjust charges of political corruption. It was these experiences and his life in exile that informed his perspective and inspired his most famous work, the Divine Comedy. The Divine Comedy remains one of the most famous poems in Western history. While living in Ravenna, Italy, Dante wrote this piece as he reflected on his life and the turmoil he endured throughout his exile. He began to write in 1308 and finished it shortly before his death in 1321. Within the Divine Comedy, Dante, the pilgrim, journeys through heaven, purgatory, and hell. He begins his journey through hell in the Inferno, guided by the famous Latin poet Virgil. While in hell, the pair travels through its 9 layers that he envisioned, designed to punish sinners. Dante's version of hell is unique because it has sinners essentially punished by their sins rather than just for them. For example, those at the 3rd circle of hell are punished for the sin of gluttony. So these sinners are forced to lie in the filth produced by an icy rain that symbolizes their own devotion to food and drink and other earthly pleasures. In depicting hell in this way, Dante demonstrates the horrors of the mortal sins themselves. Dante, traveling through these layers and witnessing the torture faced by the sinners, Virgil and Dante exit hell and purgatorio. Dante encounters the souls of purgatory in Purgatorio, who are punished for their sins in a way that parallels Inferno. However, in Purgatory, the souls are in a process of changing their ways through purification and conversion, preparing them to enter into heaven. The trials of Purgatory are strenuous, but, according to Dante, necessary to gain salvation. After journeying through Purgatory with Virgil, Dante reaches heaven, and Paradiso begins. Virgil can no longer guide Dante past this point. As a pagan, Virgil is unable to enter heaven, and Virgil hands the pilgrim off to Beatrice, a character based on a real person in Dante's life. The real Dante met Beatrice when the two were 8 years old. When he saw her 9 years later, he believed her to be the epitome of grace and beauty. So naturally, Dante struggled with the news of her death in 1290. He escaped his grief through studying philosophy and theology, and eventually immortalized Beatrice in the Divine Comedy. Beatrice, the pilgrim, Dante learns, was the one who sent Virgil to be his guide. Together with Beatrice, he grows closer and closer to God, and by the end, Dante the pilgrim is in awe of the final vision of God, which inspires him to return to his earthly life and live transformed. The real Dante uses this poem in order to compel readers to transform their own lives and devote themselves to God. Our first passage comes from Canto 1, the beginning of Inferno. Here, Dante meets the pilgrim, meets his guide, Virgil, who promises to lead him along the path to paradise. A poet himself, Dante respected Virgil immensely. Dante admired the quality and style of Virgil's work, and it is clearly evident throughout how influenced he was by Virgil's most famous work, the Aeneid. In Book 4 of the Aeneid, Aeneas journeys through the underworld, and Dante's Inferno tells a similar story, guided by the very poet who inspired the author. The two great poets begin their journey here in Canto 1. And to perform this excerpt is senior member of the Brownson Debate Team, Dana Bell.
When I saw him standing in this wasteland, have pity on my soul, I cried to him, whichever you are, shade or living man. No longer living man, though I once was, he said, and my parents were from Lombardy. Both of them were Mantuans by birth. I was born, though somewhat late, sub Julio, and lived in Rome when good Augustus reigned, and when still the false and lying gods were worshipped. I was a poet, and I sang of that just man, son of Anchises, who sailed off from Troy after the burning of the proud Ilium. But why retreat to such misery? Why not climb up this blissful mountain here, beginning and source of all men's joy? Are you then Virgil? Are you then that fount from which pours forth so rich a stream of words? I said to him, bowing my head modestly, O light and honor of the other poets, may my long years of study and that deep love which made me search your verses help me now. You are my teacher, the first of all my authors, and you alone the one from whom I took that noble style that was to bring me honor. You see the beast that forced me to retreat. Save me from her, I beg you, famous sage. She makes me tremble, the blood throbs in my veins. But you must journey down another road, he answered when he saw me lost in tears. If you ever hope to leave this wilderness, this beast, the one you cry about in fear, allows no soul to succeed along her path. She blocks his way and puts an end to him. She is by nature so perverse and vicious. Her craving belly is never satisfied, still hungering for food the more she eats. She mates with many creatures and will go on mating with more until the greyhound comes and tracks her down to make her die in agony. He will not feed on either land or money. His wisdom, love, and virtue shall sustain him. He will be born between Feltro and Feltro. He comes to save that fallen Italy for which the maid Camilla gave her life, and Turnus, Nisus, and Euryalus died of wounds. And he will hunt her through every city. until he drives her back to hell once more, whence envy first unleashed her on mankind. And so I think it best you follow me, for your own good, and I shall be your guide, to lead you out through an eternal place, where you will hear desperate cries, and see tormented shades, some old as hell itself, and know what second death is from their screams. And later, you will see those who rejoice, while they are burning, for they have hope of coming, whenever it may be, to join the blessed. To whom, if you too wish to make the climb, a spirit worthier than I must take you. I shall go back, leaving you in her care. Because that emperor dwelling on high will not let me lead any into his city, since I in life rebelled against his law. Everywhere he reigns, and there he rules. There is his city, there is his high throne. Oh, happy the one he makes his citizen. And I to him, poet, I beg of you, in the name of God, that God you never knew, save me from this evil place and worse. Lead me there to that place you spoke about, that I may see the gate St. Peter guards, and those whose anguish you have told me of. Then he moved on, and I followed close behind him.
Our next passage comes from Canto 3. Here, Dante and Virgil arrive at the entrance to hell. Dante massively influenced our perception of hell for centuries with his poem. Religious art in the centuries that followed adopted Dante's vision as inspiration. Some of the greatest minds in literature have drawn on Dante's Inferno. The great British poet T.S. Eliot held Dante in especially high esteem. His most famous work, The Wasteland, likens Earth post-World War I to the scenes of hell and death in Inferno. He even wrote a journal entitled What Dante Means to Me, where he explained his desire to mimic the format of Dante's cantos. Even today, it has taken root in popular media. From the movie Seven, which is laced with Dante references, to the children's film Ice Age, which makes reference to the Inferno excerpt we are about to see. In this excerpt, they see the outermost layer where souls are punished. This first layer is meant to punish the souls who were not accepted by either heaven or hell. This is one example of how Dante's vision of hell punishes sinners using their own sins. The souls here didn't make a choice in life, and because of that, they are forced to follow a banner at a rapid pace for eternity. At the same time, they are attacked by flies and hornets. This is how Dante criticizes those who not just refuse to follow God, but refuse to follow any creed at all. To perform this excerpt from Canto 3, we have Junior Meg Gar.
I am the way into the city. I am the way into eternal grief. I am the way to the forsaken place. Just as it was that moved my great creator. Divine omnipotence created me. And highest wisdom joined primal love. Before me, nothing but eternal things were made, and I shall last eternally.
Abandon all hope. All you who enter here. I saw these words written in somber colors, inscribed along the edge above the gate. Master, I said, these words that I see are cruel. He answered me, speaking with experience. Now here, you must leave all distrust behind. Let your cowardice die on this spot. We are at the place where earlier I said you could expect to see the suffering race of souls who lost the good of intellect. Placing his hand on mine, smiling at me in such a way that I was reassured. He led me into those mysteries. Here, sighs and cries and shrieks of lamentation echoed throughout the stateless air of hell. At first, these sounds resounding made me weep. Tongues confused, a language that strained in anguish with cadences of anger, shrill outcries and raucous groans that joined with the sound of hands. Raising a whirling storm that turns itself forever through the endless air of blood. They were like sand, swirling when a whirlwind blows. This wretched state of being is the fate of those sad souls who lived a life but lived it with no blame or praise. They are mixed with the repulsive choir of angels, neither faithful nor unfaithful to God, who undecided stood for no one but themselves. These wretches have no hope of truly dying. And this blind life they lead is so abject, it makes them envy any other fate. Heaven, to keep its beauty, had cast them out. But even hell itself would not accept them for fear that the damned would glory over them. They were cursing God, cursing their own parents, cursing the time, the place, the seed of their own creation, of their beginning. These wretches who had never truly lived went naked and were stung and stung again by the hornets and wasps that circled them. Suddenly, coming towards us in a boat, a man of years whose ancient hair was white shouted at us, "Woe to you, perverted souls! Give up all hope of ever seeing heaven. I come to lead you to the eternal darkness, to the other shore, into the fire and ice." As in autumn, when the leaves begin to fall, one after the other, until the branch is witness to the spoils all across the ground, so did the evil seed of Adam's fall drop from that shore to that boat, one at a time at the signal, like a falcon to the Lord. "My son," the gentle master said to me, "all those who perish in the wrath of God assemble here from all parts of the earth. They want to cross the river. They are eager. It is divine justice that spurs them on, turning the fear they have into desire. Their faces run blood streams. Their blood mixed with their tears dripped to their feet, and disgusting maggots collected in their lungs." At once I understood, and I was sure this was the sect of evil souls who were hateful to
Today's third passage comes from Canto 27 of Purgatorio. Purgatorio is far less well known than Inferno, and though much like Inferno, it has had tremendous influence on art and Christianity itself. Dante roots his poem in Christian doctrine, but purgatory is never directly mentioned in the Bible. Because of this, Dante's Purgatorio was once again a prominent authority in defining another aspect of life and death. The debate over scriptural support for purgatory continues to this day. In this excerpt, Dante and Virgil see imperfect souls on a journey of purification. Purgatory in this vision is a high mount that one slowly and painfully ascends. Souls gather at the bottom before making the difficult trek upwards. But following the journey, Dante sees a gate of fire dividing purgatory from paradise. Traumatized by the horror of seeing humans burning in hell, he cowers with fear. In what should be a moment of relief, Dante is reluctant. When Virgil reminds him that the flame is all that keeps Dante from Beatrice, his stubbornness melts away. To perform this excerpt from Canto 27, Senior Emily Fiesel.
It was the hour the sun's first rays shone down upon the land where the Creator shed his own life's blood when God's angel of joy appeared to us. Upon the bank beyond the fire's reach he stood, and the living beauty of his voice rang clear. Holy souls, no farther can you go without first suffering fire. So enter now, but be not deaf to what is sung beyond. He said to us as we came up to him, when I heard these words, felt like a man who is about to be entombed alive. Gripping my hands together, I leaned forward and staring at the fire, I recalled what human bodies look like burned to death. Both of my friendly guides turned toward me then, and Virgil said to me, "Oh, my son, there may be pain here, but there is no death. Believe me when I say that if you spent 1,000 years within the fire's heart, it would not singe a single hair of yours. And if you still cannot believe my words, approach the fire and test it for yourself. On your own robe, just touch it with the hem. It's time, high time, to put away your fears. Turn towards me, come and enter without fear." But there I stood, immobile and ashamed. He said, somewhat annoyed to see me fixed and stubborn there, "Now don't you see, my son, only this wall keeps you from Beatrice." And just so my stubbornness melted away, hearing the name which blooms eternally within my mind, I turned to my wise guide. He shook his head and smiled, as if at a child. "That precious fruit for which all men eagerly search on many different boughs will give today peace to your hungry soul." These were the words Virgil spoke to me, and never a more auspicious gift given or received with more joyfulness. Growing desire to be up there was rising in me with each step I took. I felt my wings were growing for the flight whence the stairs, swiftly climbed, were all behind me, and we were standing on the topmost step. Virgil addressed me, fixing his eyes on mine. "You have now seen, my son, the temporal and eternal fire. You've reached the place where my discernment has now reached its end. I led you here with skill and intellect. From here on out, let pleasure be your guide. The narrow ways, the steep are far below. Behold the sun shining on your brow. Behold the tender grass. Let pleasure be your guide. Behold the trees, the flowers which here the earth produces of itself. Until those lovely eyes rejoicing come, which cheerful once urged me to come to you, you may sit here or wander as you please. Expect no longer words or signs from me. Now it is your will upright, wholesome and free, and to not heed its pleasure would be wrong." I crown and miter you. Lord of yourself.
Finally, Dante reaches paradise. Propelled across the threshold by love, he learns that existing in paradise is existing in love itself. Dante's struggle to reach paradise and the fact that love is what got him there in the end touches on and reinforces a major theme throughout Christian thought that has spread into one of the most common themes in modern media, the idea that love conquers fear. Dante arrives in a heaven of 3 spheres. In the lowest sphere, he meets Picarda, a noble woman who is stuck in this lower sphere for having violated her vows in life. Dante, ego still intact, asks if she does not wish to ascend to a higher sphere of heaven. She says that she does not, for accepting her place in God's order is what gives her a place in paradise. Herein lies, in Dante's view, the key to blessed happiness, the conforming of one's own will to God's. Finally, performing Canto 3 of Paradiso, freshman Nicholas Kim.
Brother, the virtue of our heavenly love tempers our will and makes us want no more than what we have. We crave for this alone. If we desire to be higher up, then our desires would not be in accordance with His will, who assigns us to this sphere. Think carefully what love is, and you'll see. Such discard has no place within these realms, since to be here is to exist in love. Indeed, the essence of this blessed state is to dwell here within His holy will, so that there is no will but one with His. The order of our rank from height to height throughout this realm is pleased by this realm. As to that King whose will us to His will, in His will is our peace. It is the sea, in which all things are drawn. It is ourselves creates, which the work of nature makes. That it was clear to me that everywhere of heaven, paradise, though there is light of grace supreme, it does not shine equally. As happens when we've had our fill of one food, but we still crave another. While giving thanks for this, we ask for that. So did my words and gestures beg to know about the cloth through which she had not drawn, the shuttle of her incompleted vow. A picture-perfect life, great virtue have a shrine, a lady high above, she said, whose rule decides the cloak and veil on some earth, whose wish till death to wake and sleep beside, the bridge room who accepts all vows of love. Confirming to this pleasure from the world, I fled as a young girl to follow her, and in her habits rule, I closed myself and pledged to always follow and hear practice. Then men, acquainted less with love than hate, took me by force away that sweet fold, took me by force away from that sweet fold, and God alone knows what my life became. This other radiance here is this light, who shows herself to you as she shines full, with all the light around this sphere. Well knows, from her own life, what my own words can mean. She was a sister, too, from her head, too. They ripped the shadow of her holy veil, but even when forced back into the world, against her will, against her sacred vows, She always wore the veil over her heart.
Seven 700 years after Dante's death, his works still have incredible power today. The Divine Comedy best exemplifies this with its vivid descriptions of hopelessness and redemption. By telling the story of a mortal man faced with death and resurrection, the poetry which inspires so many today captures the very essence of Christian thought. Despite its medieval origins, Dante's vivid exercise in imagination remains as relevant and powerful to us in 2021 as it was in 1321.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you to all of our speakers. If we could have all of our speakers please come forward. We now would like to open up the floor to a brief Q&A session. So any questions that you have for our interpreters based on the selections, their performance choices, their relationship to Dante's poetry, or just their experiences as Seton Hall students and members of our speech and debate team, feel free to raise your hand for any questions. Yeah, Kelly.
Well, it's great job with the performances. What helps you guys mentally like prepare for your performance? Like what's your beforehand prep?
I know I have to be caffeinated. Must be caffeinated. We all, a lot of the time, drink the same drink. It's just like these little rituals that I have for myself, like whether that's drinking the same Starbucks refresher drink before every performance, or going over my speech in my head before I perform, or if I feel particularly nervous, I'll go to the bathroom and psych myself up a little bit in the mirror. And mostly just really looking forward to it is helpful. Anybody else want to speak on that?
I want to, yeah. Kind of the note that Emily Fiesel just ended on, making sure that what you are performing is something that you love and something that you care about and something that you want to share with others, I think is the best alleviator of any stress, because who cares if you do badly if you wanted to do it, right? So I think wanting to do it is the first step.
Yeah. Similar note. I always do affirmations before I speak. My favorite one I do before I go to speak is I cast out everything that does not serve me, and then I really like to focus on the message of what I'm doing. Knowing what you're trying to say and why you're trying to say it, just like Dana says, is probably the most important thing that we do.
Questions? Yeah, Alex? So what would you say is, like any of you could jump in, what would you say is like your favorite part of interpreting a piece of literature? Like what brings you the most enjoyment out of it?
I can go first on this one. I am a firm believer that narratives have so much power. I think sometimes we forget about them when we're searching for hard facts, which also obviously have their place in arguments, but there's something so human about a narrative that when you're really looking at a complex issue, or something that's incredibly important to you, you can't forget about the importance of the humans that it's affected. And a great way to do that, and a great way to have insight, is through written works or performed works. And just to bring in a character that you can see, and a person that you can see going through the issues and their input on it, instead of reading it as cold hard facts, makes it so much easier to stomach. And that's one of my favorite things about interpretation.
I agree. And depending on the environment that we're doing it in, sometimes my favorite part is the audience. You know, I mean, if none of you were here, it wouldn't be a performance anymore. And so I think that audience members are just as much part of the fuel that's pushing performers to do more and push themselves further as they are. So I love when people are engaged, personally.
I think if I can add on, there's something I definitely learned actually from Sam, is that you can actually make the poem yours. Where sometimes you can just read it and those are words. What actually gives a poem life is a person reading it. Then being able to interpret it is being able to act out in a way that shows your individuality and your personality within the
Well said, man. And everyone. Mirabel, I saw you had your hand up.
Yes, wow, and the team never disappoints. They never do. Like I said in the beginning, you guys are next to my heart. But I have two questions. When I gave Sam the excerpts from Dante, how do you pick which one you want to perform? All of them were amazing. But how do you pick that one that you interpret in such an amazing way?
I picked mine for two reasons. First, because it sets the narrative structure. We wanted to represent the entirety of the Divine Comedy. And for that to happen, you need to represent all parts of it. So for my section, at the very least, I really wanted to represent entering the Inferno, entering hell, because that sets the stage for the rest of the comedy. The other reason I chose mine was because of what that section means. Since he's entering for the first time, it's his first time experiencing the loss and the tragedy that comes out of the Inferno, and I think it was really critical for his journey and for the story to represent that anguish that comes with it.
Yeah, for me as well, in interpreting Inferno, but specifically the portion where Dante meets Virgil, I've always just loved that part of it. The description of the beast following Virgil and him, or following Dante and him coming to Virgil and saying, "Are you then Virgil? Are you then that fount, that teacher that I've loved so much?" It just really, really, I don't know, it just touches me personally. And I do find that sometimes though, when I first read this, probably in a philosophy class at one point, I will admit, I might not have understood it. But after reading it over and over again and in different ways, you sometimes find that that point where it clicks and you get it can only be reached through performance. And that piece specifically, I found myself able to understand when read aloud. So it just had more of a historical important meaning to me, at least. So I really liked the portion that I chose.
I know I picked mine. A lot of that was writing on the very last line, "I crown you Lord of yourself." I love that line. I think it's so beautiful, and I read through everything, and I love Purgatorio in general. I just think it's really interesting, and then how the sins represent each other and the punishments represent each other, and we get to this line, this section, and it focuses, for the first time, in my opinion, so much on the individuality of the soul and individuality of devotion. And when it says, "I crown you the Lord of yourself," and I went back and I read it through that lens, I just thought it was beautiful about how taking your environment and placing the responsibility of how you go forward on yourself. And that's why I chose my section.
I know for my section, I found it really interesting how Dante's in paradise, but he's still going through issues and problems. Because when we ideally think of paradise, and specifically heaven, we think of life is perfect. But even during his existence, while he's in paradise, he's still thinking about Beatrice. He's still thinking about love. He's still thinking about all the things he doesn't have, instead of just taking fulfillment in the paradise that he's actually in. So I know that's something that I found very interesting, and so I just wanted to really interpret that to my best ability.
Daniel, you have done such an amazing job narrating all this. But to define you, the figure, I happened to take a class as an undergraduate on theology of Dante. One of our Seton Hall scholars, Father Douglas Malusky, and I've been teaching Dante for 4 years, but I have to tell you from my heart, you made this excerpts come alive. You really have. Loved it.
A few more questions? Yeah.
Yeah. What was your guys' first initial reaction when reading this? Because I know my first reaction was, this guy had to be on drugs.
I think Dante is really interesting because it's really like a self-insert fan fiction of the Bible.
Yeah.
It really is, and it's like, so that was one of my first thoughts reading it, just like really, really interesting about this original thought that formed so much dialogue about Christian thought. And I also read it for the first time in my Journey of Transformation class freshman year, and I didn't really know what was going on when we first started it until my professor, who no longer teaches here, but he was fantastic, did a reading of it in class, and that's when it started to click. So what Dana was saying, it's especially as you go further back, this is 14th century poetry. I wasn't prepared to dive into that when I was freshly 18, and just hearing it back was really interesting. So I was excited to do that as well.
Yeah.
Dana, I know you said that you read over the literature a bunch of times before reading it. How long do you guys have to prepare before?
In a competition setting, we prepare throughout the year and have competitions throughout the year. So really, how long it takes is however long the season is, because we're constantly changing and working on pieces. For this event specifically, we were notified of it a few weeks ago, I believe, around there. And so we've been working on it together as a team and having rehearsals here and there to work on this. But when it comes to like our competitions as a team, it's a never-ending, ever-changing process, for sure.
Any other questions?
I guess that this pandemic has really interfered with so many live performances, and it's great that, Broadway is now back to open, but people have masks on, and I know it's kind of interesting because the five of you are here for the first time performing with an audience since, my goodness, 2 years ago. I looked at Emily and I said, last time you performed, you were a sophomore, now you're a senior in front of, so my question is, this group of people are your first live audience since the pandemic.
Yeah.
That your competitions have all been virtual.
Yeah.
What did that feel like by connecting Dante's work to some of the messages in Dante to what you've experienced in 2 years to today? That's a lot there, but any thoughts on that?
Your eyes say it all. That's all I'm gonna say. The expressions, Professor Sissy, they don't need a mask. Your eyes say everything.
I could talk about this because I was a freshman with coronavirus. So almost all of my public speaking in college experience has been online. So I know for me, you all walk in here, I was like, oh wait, do I do this again? So yeah, that was definitely weird, but exciting.
It's definitely an electric feeling to be able to connect with an audience, especially with a work like this because it's so filled with emotion to begin with. To be able to look someone in the eyes while you're trying to share that. Like Maribel said, it's all in the eyes, you can see it all there. Being able to connect with someone like that is something that we've really lost during the pandemic. And it does feel like electric in your bones to have that again.
When you go home for the holidays and you haven't seen your family, and you're like, okay, I know that going into this, they're gonna have questions about what they observe. And it's a little bit nerve-wracking to come back after not, seeing faces when I'm performing, but at the same time, it's that feeling of, I'm home,
Yeah, and I was just going to say, one aspect that helped, or thought process that helped me get through it was, traditionally you pretend everyone's in their underwear, but we all have masks on, so I just pretended everyone was smiling. That helps.
Yeah, I know for me, I definitely view this as a great privilege. I think this pandemic's definitely sort of allowed us to take advantage of what we do have, in the sense of having this opportunity, although I think many of us would have liked to be spoke without the mask on. Being able to have it on and being able to have a live audience is always a great thing to have. And then having people during the enactment, people nodding their heads, showing liveliness, showing that they're breathing. things like that did make it very fun, and I know I've loved my experience and time with all of you here today.
Well, thank you all for coming out. Oh, one more question? Yeah, go for it.
Why do you guys think he chose to punish the sinners with the sin that he committed? I have my own interpretation, but I just wanted to hear what you guys think. Anyone can answer.
It's literally poetic justice, you know? I think when you're thinking about, when you're placing myself in his shoes, when you're writing, how do you decide how to do how do you write it? Is it just to see a fire, or are you going to emotionally delve further into that and how you do that? That's what I think about it.
The way I always saw it was like, it could have just been like, hey, they're all burning because nobody wants to burn. But I think the way that they're all suffering, like through their sins, shows that, you know, those sins are detrimental, not just in this extreme, but in our real lives.
And I think that if you went through life knowing that when you die, whatever you do to others will be done to you, you may act differently.
Yeah, because I think that really ties into how the piece ends, how he comes back to Earth a reformed person. Like, he's called the pilgrim. He's on a pilgrimage. He's learning something through this. So by seeing people punished by the things that they've done, that is his journey to understanding.
Well, once again, I really can't express the gratitude that we have for you all being here. An oral interpretation requires an audience, bringing together literature, performance, and audience. So thank you all for being here and being part of that. And
Before we close,
yes,
please, I would like to introduce Dr. Nancy Enright to say some words before we close.
Absolutely. Welcome, Dr. Enright.
Thank you. I apologize that I didn't, I had a conflict tonight that I just didn't absolutely, I had to be in this other place. But I just love the question and answers, and I love Dante, so I am going to listen. I'm going to listen to your presentation, and I just love the answers that you. How exciting it is that this is your first event, that you're doing this about Dante, you're doing it for the. We're so grateful to the team for this. I know you guys are really award-winning and they really give some life. That is incredibly important for any, and you know, of that text. And I think with some of the answers like that last question that I asked about, you know, why did he punish the sinner? I thought the answers that were very profound. And it's like, you know, this I guess it's so funny. It's very lively, like a movie. It's the Divine Comedy is not about punishment, it's about moving on and realizing that your sins not only hurt other people but hurt you. And so, what do you do? Poetic justice. It's like, come on, you're going to. It's really redemptive. So, and I think that's the thing that a lot of people forget. We focus on the fire and brimstone and all that, but that's really not what it's about. So anyway, thank you so much, and thank you, Professor Zizek and Professor Sam, and everybody on the team. Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that, like, how it's about moving and changing, you know, not letting your sins hold you down, like, changing to become a better person. Because how I interpreted how he chose to punish people with their sins is that, like, it's like an eye for an eye. So, you know, if I slap someone in the face, I'm like, oh, that's funny. But they slap me back, it's not gonna feel so nice. So, pretty much, yeah.
Absolutely, it's kind of like, you know, what goes around comes around, but it's also like, sometimes like in some of the parts of hell, the sin itself is its own punishment, like just, it's, like, for example, Satan is in a block of ice, because the essence of sin is cold, not hot. And I think the worst sins are in the frozen parts of it. So like, you know, he's making this ice with his wings, because he's so cold. And that, you know, the love, heaven is a place of love. And that's I think it's the Divine Comedy show things, you know, that's what it's about. Great comment. So thank you, everybody.
I'm going to eat this.
President,
if they, those of you, I got the keys, I hope you enjoyed the presentation.
That matters, you know, coming home.
No, I made it an extra credit for my fourth grade.
That's the best thing.